High on a windswept hill, where the past seems to whisper through every stone, stands a fortress unlike any other. Picture this, a place where the clink of prisoner chains once echoed through the same halls where scholars turned the pages of priceless manuscripts, where the cold bite of a dungeon met the boundless curiosity of stargazers tracing constellations from the rooftop. This isn't just a castle, it's a riddle carved in stone, a monument to the contradictions of human ambition. How could one building serve as a prison, a library, and an observatory all at once? The answer lies in a story of power, knowledge, and the unyielding desire to reach beyond what seems possible. Think about the last time you stood in a place that made you feel small, not just in size, but in time. That's the weight this fortress carries, built in an era when the line between enlightenment and oppression was often blurred. It became a stage where the brightest and darkest facets of humanity played out side by side. Within these walls, a scholar might have paused mid-sentence, quill hovering over parchment, as the cry of a prisoner below drifted up through the floorboards. At night, astronomers would ascend to the towers, their eyes fixed on the heavens, while somewhere beneath them, keys turned in heavy iron locks. This was a world where the pursuit of knowledge coexisted with the reality of confinement, where the stars seemed closer than freedom. What does it say about us that we could build such a place, that within the same walls we sought to unlock the secrets of the universe while locking away our fellow human beings? The story of this fortress isn't just about stone and mortar, it's about the duality of progress itself. Over the next minutes, we'll walk its corridors together, uncovering how it came to be, who walked its halls, and why its legacy still captivates us centuries later. This is more than history. It's a mirror reflecting the complexities of ambition, a reminder that even our greatest achievements are rarely simple. So let's step inside and discover what this extraordinary place can teach us about the tangled web of knowledge, power, and the human spirit. The story of this fortress begins with a ruler whose ambition stretched beyond mere conquest. In an age when power was often measured by the sword, he dared to believe it could also be measured by the pen and the telescope. Commissioned in the late 14th century, its foundations were laid by a king who saw knowledge as both a weapon and a treasure. He ruled a realm perched between warring neighbors, where survival demanded strong walls but prosperity demanded something more. So he ordered a structure that would defy expectations, part stronghold, part sanctuary for learning. The architect he chose was no ordinary builder. Trained in mathematics, astronomy, and military engineering, this man understood that true strength required both stone and scholarship. He designed towering walls thick enough to withstand siege engines, but also carved hidden alcoves for scribes to copy ancient texts. The central courtyard could muster troops at a moment's notice, yet its upper floors held quiet scriptoriums where monks and scholars labored over maps and star charts. Even the dungeon had a purpose beyond punishment. Its deepest chamber housed an ingenious water clock, its gears whispering the hours to prisoners and philosophers alike. Why combine these seemingly opposite worlds? Because the ruler knew that empires are built not just on land, but on ideas. Within these walls, astronomers tracked comets that might herald famine or fortune, while scribes preserved medical treatises that could heal armies. The fortress became a living machine, its gears turning on both warfare and wisdom. To stand in its great hall was to feel the tension between shadow and light, the chill of iron bars on one side, the warm glow of candlelit manuscripts on the other. And yet, for all its grandeur, the fortress was never meant to be a palace. Its beauty lay in its purpose, every archway, every spiral staircase served dual roles, defense and discovery. Even the ramparts doubled as observation decks, where guards scanned the horizon for enemies by day, and scholars charted the movements of planets by night. This wasn't just innovation, it was a declaration, a statement that knowledge could be as vital as any army, that the mind's frontiers were worth guarding as fiercely as the kingdom's borders. What's most striking isn't just that such a place existed, but that it thrived. For generations, it drew the brightest minds and the fiercest warriors, all bound by the unshakable belief that progress required both. The fortress stood as a testament to a radical idea, that walls could shelter more than swords, and that the greatest threats and hopes often came not from beyond the gates, but from within the human spirit itself. Imagine a room where the air itself seemed to hum with the turning of parchment pages, where the glow of 100 candles flickered across gilded letters painstakingly painted by hand. This was the fortress's crowning jewel, a library so vast, so meticulously curated, that it became a beacon for thinkers across continents. Unlike the austere monasteries or royal collections of its time, this was a living archive where scholars from Damascus to Paris gathered not just to preserve knowledge, but to challenge it. The shelves groaned under the weight of forbidden texts, treatises on astronomy that contradicted church doctrine, medical scrolls detailing surgeries deemed impossible, and philosophical works that asked dangerous questions. In an age when certain ideas could get you excommunicated, or worse, the fortress's walls offered rare protection. Guards stood watch not just against invading armies, but against the agents of kings and bishops who might demand the burning of these heretical volumes. Here, a physician could dissect the human body without fear, while a mathematician plotted the orbits of planets unseen by the naked eye. What made this collection extraordinary wasn't just its contents, but how it was used. This wasn't a static repository, it was a workshop of the mind. Scholars worked side by side, translating Greek and Arabic texts into Latin, debating their meanings late into the night. A visiting astronomer might scribble corrections in the margins of a star chart, only for a monk to add his own rebuttal a week later. The library's books bore the marks of these conversations, ink-stained fingerprints, hastily written notes between lines, even the occasional wine spill from an impassioned debate. And then there were the scribes, bent over wooden desks, their hands moved with practiced precision, copying texts that might otherwise vanish from history. Each stroke of their quills was an act of defiance against time itself. Some manuscripts took months to complete, their pages adorned with intricate illustrations, dragons curling around medical diagrams, angels hovering at the edges of cosmological maps. These weren't mere decorations, they were visual arguments, blending art and science in ways that words alone couldn't convey. But perhaps the library's most radical feature was its accessibility. While most medieval collections were locked away, accessible only to clergy or nobility, this fortress welcomed anyone with a keen mind. A merchant's son could study alongside a duke's heir, provided he could keep pace with the discussions. The only currency that mattered here was curiosity. Of course, this openness came with risks: fires from overturned candles, thefts by desperate scholars, even the occasional brawl over conflicting interpretations of Aristotle. Yet the rulers tolerated these hazards, believing the exchange of ideas was worth the cost. In the end, the library's true power lay in its contradictions. It was a place of quiet contemplation that thrived on heated debate, a sanctuary for fragile manuscripts guarded by ironclad warriors, a treasure house of ancient wisdom that somehow felt vibrantly new. To walk its aisles was to witness humanity at its best and most restless, forever reaching, questioning, and refusing to accept that any door, whether made of wood or dogma, should remain locked. Descending the spiral staircase from the sunlit library, the air grew thick with the scent of damp stone and something far more unsettling, the quiet despair of those forgotten behind iron bars. The fortress's lower levels told a different story than the luminous halls above, one where ink-stained fingers gave way to shackled wrists. Here, in windowless chambers carved deep into the bedrock, the price of defiance was measured in endless nights. Political rivals, religious dissenters, even scholars whose theories threatened the status quo, all found themselves swallowed by these shadows. The cells were ingeniously placed beneath the library's eastern wing, a cruel irony that allowed the occasional drip of wax from scribes' candles above to seep through cracks in the ceiling, like mocking stars in a prisoner's perpetual night. Some detainees were nobles who'd gambled and lost in court intrigues. Others were commoners caught whispering against the crown. But the most haunting figures were the so-called heretics, thinkers whose ideas about the cosmos or the soul clashed too violently with doctrine. The same rulers who protected controversial manuscripts upstairs often condemned the men who dared to live by their radical words. Conditions varied by a prisoner's status and the whims of their jailers. A disgraced knight might endure cold solitude in a cell with a narrow slit for air, while a peasant rebel faced the clamor of the oubliette, where the only company was the scuttle of rats. Yet even in this darkness, fragments of humanity persisted. Guards traded scraps of parchment for favors, allowing some prisoners to scribble letters or equations. One cell wall bears faint charcoal sketches of constellations, likely scrawled by an astronomer who'd once studied those same stars from the rooftop above. Another holds a prayer etched into stone, the letters worn smooth by generations of fingertips tracing their curves. The true horror lay in the fortress's seamless duality. A scholar could be debating Aristotle's ethics at noon and find himself shackled by sundown, his fate decided by a shift in political winds. The prison wasn't just a place of punishment. It was a tool of control, a reminder that knowledge, no matter how exalted, always danced on the edge of a blade. When foreign ambassadors visited, their tours carefully avoided the echoing coughs from behind certain doors. The library's grandeur depended on this unspoken bargain. Enlightenment for some required the silencing of others. What's most revealing isn't the cruelty. Medieval justice was rarely gentle, but how casually these two worlds coexisted. A jailer might pause to listen to a monk's lecture drifting down the stairs before turning the key in a lock. The scribes copying medical texts likely knew their work would never reach the physician wasting away in the dungeon below. This friction between idealism and brutality wasn't a flaw in the fortress's design. It was the design. A society that reached for the stars while burying its dissenters in stone was one forever torn between its highest aspirations and its basest instincts. The stones themselves seem to remember. Tap on certain walls and you'll hear hollow spaces where messages might still hide. Scratched prayers, recipes for poison, or perhaps just a name repeated until the letters blurred. These ghosts of ink and iron remind us that progress has always been a fractured thing, its light casting shadows as long as its legacy. High above the claustrophobic darkness of the dungeons, where the air smelled of candle wax and ambition, the fortress's astronomers climbed each night to their sacred perch. The observatory wasn't just a room, it was a bridge between earth and heaven, a place where the medieval world reached toward the infinite. With instruments crafted from brass and bone, these stargazers plotted the paths of planets with a precision that defied their era. A single misaligned measurement could mean the difference between predicting a harvest-saving eclipse or dooming a kingdom to famine. The weight of that responsibility hung in the air, as tangible as the iron rings bolted to the walls below. The tools they used were marvels of ingenuity. An astrolabe, its surface etched with delicate arabesques, could calculate the altitude of stars even as its shadow stretched across the prison yard. Quadrants painstakingly calibrated against the North Star allowed navigators to steer ships through treacherous waters, their routes plotted from this very tower. But the most revered object was the fortress's great armillary sphere, a skeletal globe of interlocking rings representing celestial orbits, its brass bands polished smooth by generations of reverent hands. To touch it was to feel the mechanics of the universe click into place beneath your fingers. What's often forgotten is how deeply astronomy shaped daily life beyond these walls. When an astronomer announced the approach of a comet, farmers stored extra grain, fearing drought. Kings delayed coronations if the stars foretold misfortune. Even the prison's schedule adjusted to celestial rhythms. Executions were avoided during eclipses, when the darkened sun was seen as an omen of divine displeasure. The observatory's influence seeped into every crack of society, proving that science and superstition were tangled like vines on the fortress walls. Yet for all its practicality, the stargazers' work was also profoundly philosophical. Charting the heavens forced them to confront dizzying questions. Were other worlds circling distant suns? Did the moon's craters hold secrets older than scripture? Some astronomers risked heresy by suggesting the Earth moved. Their whispers carried down to the library where sympathetic scribes hid controversial calculations between the pages of approved texts. The observatory became a sanctuary for dangerous thoughts, its high vantage point offering literal and metaphorical perspective. The real magic lay in the rituals. Every new moon, the chief astronomer would climb to the roof with a silver bowl of wine, offering a toast to the constellations as they emerged. It was theater and theology blended with science, a reminder that understanding the cosmos required both calculation and wonder. On clear nights, the ruler might join them, standing shoulder to shoulder with low-born scholars, all momentarily equal under the sky's impartial gaze. For those hours, the fortress's hierarchies dissolved. A prisoner's chains mattered no more than a king's crown when measured against the vastness of the Milky Way. This collision of opposites, rigorous mathematics and celestial poetry, royal patronage and intellectual rebellion, made the observatory the fortress's beating heart. While the library preserved knowledge and the prison enforced order, the tower embodied humanity's restless need to look beyond itself. The astronomers knew their work would outlast them. The stars they charted would shine on long after the fortress crumbled, after the books molded, after the last prisoner's name faded from memory. In tracing those distant lights, they left a message for the future, that even in an age of walls and shackles, the human mind could never truly be confined. To understand the genius of this fortress, you have to think like the architect who designed it, someone who saw walls not just as barriers, but as living systems. Every curve of stone, every hidden stairwell was a calculated decision. Take the outer walls, 10 feet thick in places, studded with arrow slits angled to rain death on invaders. Yet these same walls cradled something extraordinary inside their bulk. Narrow, winding corridors just wide enough for a single scribe to slip through with an armful of manuscripts. The fortress didn't just separate spaces, it orchestrated movement, ensuring that a guard delivering bread to a prisoner would never intersect with an astronomer rushing to record a meteor shower. The towers tell their own story. From a distance, they looked like standard military structures, tall, imposing, built to spot enemy banners on the horizon. But climb inside and you'd find their true duality. Spiral staircases corkscrewed upward, their steps worn smooth by two kinds of traffic, soldiers hauling buckets of pitch for defense, and scholars carrying delicate instruments to measure the moon's craters. The battlements doubled as observation decks, their parapets notched with both crossbow grooves and precise sight lines for aligning quadrants with the stars. Even the mortar between the stones had purpose, mixed with crushed oyster shells to reflect torchlight for nighttime readings, yet strong enough to withstand a battering ram. Then there were the secrets. A false panel in the library's south wall concealed a shaft leading straight to the dungeon's interrogation chamber, allowing rulers to eavesdrop on prisoners' conversations. Meanwhile, a rainwater channel carved into the courtyard's flagstones funneled runoff into a cistern that fed the observatory's clepsydra, a water clock whose rhythmic drips timed both celestial events and the changing of prison guards. The architect treated silence like a material, weaving it into the design. The library's floors were layered with sheep's wool to muffle footsteps, while the prison's ceilings used hollow bricks to amplify cries for mercy into whispers at the warden's door. But the true masterpiece was the central courtyard. Sunken 3 steps below ground level, it served as a sundial, the shadows of its colonnades marking equinoxes and solstices for agricultural planning. Yet those same columns hid iron rings where rebels were once chained during public punishments. Even the garden's medicinal herbs played multiple roles, soothing scholars' headaches from hours of study or brewing poultices for prisoners' wounds. Nothing was singular. Every archway, every vaulted ceiling answered to both sword and quill. What's staggering isn't just the precision of this design, but the philosophy behind it. This wasn't a patchwork of functions haphazardly stacked together. It was a manifesto in stone. The message was clear. Knowledge and power weren't opposing forces, but 2 sides of the same blade. A ruler could jail a heretic in the morning and fund his research by evening if the findings proved useful. The fortress's architecture made that contradiction possible, even elegant. Its walls didn't just divide light from dark, they proved how much each needed the other to exist, and perhaps that's why, centuries later, the stones still feel alive. Run your hand along the observatory's parapet, and you'll touch grooves worn by generations of astronomers' elbows. Pause in the library's alcoves, and the walls seem to hum with the memory of whispered debates. Even the prison's coldest cells bear scratches that form constellations' desperate attempts to map the same skies visible from the tower above. This building wasn't just a place. It was a living argument about what humanity could be at its best and worst, and how often those 2 faces share the same foundation. Among the fortress's most extraordinary assets were the thinkers it sheltered, men and women whose ideas crackled like lightning across the medieval world's intellectual landscape. Picture a Persian physician dissecting cadavers by lamplight, his notes contradicting centuries of medical dogma, or a Spanish mathematician hunched over parchment, scribbling equations that would one day explain planetary motion. These weren't just scholars, they were radicals wrapped in ink-stained robes, drawn to the fortress because its walls offered something rarer than gold: the freedom to question. Take Ibrahim al-Halabi, the Syrian astronomer who mapped the moon's phases with such precision that sailors used his charts for decades. By day, he taught geometry to the rulers' sons. By night, he whispered theories about infinite universes to apprentices daring enough to listen. Then there was Sister Beatrice of Flanders, a nun whose herbal compendium mixed scripture with startlingly accurate botany, her entry on foxglove's effect on the heart predating modern cardiology by 4 centuries. What united them wasn't just brilliance but bravery. Every manuscript they penned risked angering powers beyond the fortress, from the church to rival courts. The real magic happened in the debates. Twice weekly, scholars gathered in the scriptorium's vaulted hall, where arguments grew so heated that servants learned to dodge flying wax tablets. A Neapolitan philosopher might spar with a Moorish engineer over Aristotle's physics, their clash of perspectives sharpening both minds. These weren't polite academic exercises, they were intellectual bloodsport where ideas lived or died by their merits. The rulers encouraged this friction, knowing sparks often ignited progress. After one legendary debate on optics, 3 scholars collaborated on a treatise about lenses that later inspired the first telescopes. Yet the line between innovation and heresy was perilously thin. When the alchemist Master Cheng proposed that metals could transmute, his patrons applauded until his notes mentioned the soul of matter, a phrase that sent inquisitors scurrying. For 3 tense months, he worked under guard, his experiments scrutinized for signs of witchcraft. Others weren't so lucky. The philosopher Elias of Toledo spent his final years in the dungeons, gentle confinement, allowed parchment but not visitors, his groundbreaking essays on democracy smuggled out page by page in laundry bundles. What survives today are traces of their courage marginalia in manuscripts where scholars debated each other across generations, cryptic diagrams that hint at discoveries too dangerous to spell out, even the occasional doodle of a frowning bishop in a star chart's corner. These fragile pages, preserved against war and fire by the fortress's sheer mass, remind us how fragile enlightenment can be. The scholars understood their work might outlast them, that someday someone would break the seals on their forbidden books and find not demons but the future. Beneath the fortress's soaring towers and bustling scriptoriums, the walls held another kind of record, not in ink but in scratches. These were the marks of the forgotten, the prisoners whose names rarely graced official ledgers. A nobleman stripped of his titles might spend years in a cell with a narrow slit of a window, watching the seasons change through a rectangle of sky no wider than his palm. A peasant rebel, arrested after a failed uprising, could find himself in the oubliette, where the only light came from the occasional torch flickering past the grate above. Their crimes were as varied as their fates: a poet who mocked the wrong duke, a merchant who refused to pay a corrupt tax, a scholar whose theories threatened the crown's authority. What little we know of them comes in fragments, ghostly traces that refuse to vanish. In one cell, a prisoner carved a chessboard into the stone floor, the squares worn smooth by fingers replaying imaginary games. Another left a tally of days in careful notches along the wall, stopping abruptly after the 374th mark. The most haunting are the words smuggled out in laundry, scrawled on scraps of parchment, or etched into plaster with a stolen nail. "Tell my son I taught him to fish by the old mill," reads one. Another, in a shaky hand, "The stars are brightest just before dawn." These weren't confessions or manifestos. They were the quiet, stubborn acts of people insisting they'd existed at all. The fortress's rulers understood the power of these silences. A duke imprisoned for treason might be given a feather and ink, not out of kindness, but to extract a confession wrapped in elegant script. His cell would be furnished with a desk, even a bed, the comforts a calculated reminder of what he'd lost. Meanwhile, a scribe jailed for copying forbidden texts would crouch in a straw-strewn corner, his fingers stiff with cold, trying to reconstruct passages from memory. The difference between them wasn't just rank, it was the value of their voices. One might be pardoned if his words served the crown, the other would vanish, his ideas buried with him. Yet sometimes the prisoners turned their confinement into a kind of defiance. A knight awaiting execution sketched intricate heraldic designs on his cell wall, reclaiming the symbols that had once defined him. A group of heretics held in a communal cell devised a coded language, tapping rhythms on the pipes to share prayers the gods couldn't understand. Even the graffiti held secrets. A crude drawing of a bird in flight might be signed with a name or a date or a single word, "Remember." What's chilling is how neatly these lives fit into the fortress's grand design. The same rulers who funded groundbreaking astronomy tolerated, even encouraged the dungeon's existence because it reinforced a brutal truth. Knowledge was power, but power decided what counted as knowledge. A star chart could be celebrated or burned depending on who drew it. A philosopher's treatise might earn him a place at the high table or a chain around his ankle. The prisoners were the counterbalance to the scholars, their suffering a silent tax paid for progress. Their stories matter not because they're extraordinary, but because they're ordinary. The fortress's genius lies in showing us how easily brilliance and brutality can share the same foundation. The astronomers charting the heavens needed someone to grind their lenses. The philosophers debating ethics relied on servants to carry their candles, and the library's pristine manuscripts, their vellum pages were scraped from the skins of animals tended by farmers who'd never set foot inside its hallowed halls. The prisoners remind us that history isn't just written by the victors, it's built on the backs of the unseen, the unheard, the ones who left their marks where they could, whispering, "I was here." The astronomers who climbed the fortress's towers each night carried more than just brass instruments, they bore the weight of an entire world view on their shoulders. In their hands, a quadrant wasn't merely a tool, it was a key to deciphering the divine. Their calculations determined when farmers planted crops, when armies marched, even when kings crowned their heirs. A single misaligned measurement could ripple through the kingdom, turning a predicted drought into a famine or a promised victory into a bloody defeat. These weren't just men of numbers, they were translators between the earthly and the celestial, their parchments smudged with ink and ambition. One particularly meticulous stargazer, a Hungarian monk named Laszlo, left behind a notebook where his nightly observations alternated with prayers for forgiveness. He'd chart the path of Mars with one entry, then confess his terror that such work might be blasphemy in the next. This tension between devotion and discovery defined the observatory's spirit. The astronomers knew their work could save lives. Their eclipse predictions allowed coastal villages to flee before tsunamis, yet they also understood the risks. When a junior scholar named Anselm proposed that the sun, not the earth, might anchor the cosmos, his superiors quietly burned his notes not out of malice, but to protect him from the Inquisition's flames. Their influence extended far beyond the tower. The fortress's astronomers served as royal advisors, their star charts spread across war tables. A comet's appearance in 1583 delayed a queen's invasion plans, as its tail was interpreted as a heavenly warning. Their agricultural calendars, etched onto bronze discs and distributed to villages, synchronized planting with lunar cycles, a practice still echoed in some regional harvest festivals today. Even the prison's routines bent to celestial events. Executions were postponed during eclipses, when the darkened sun was seen as a sign of divine displeasure. What's often overlooked is how deeply these stargazers relied on the fortress's other inhabitants. The library's scribes copied star tables with hands steady from years of practice, while the dungeon's blacksmiths forged the delicate rings of their armillary spheres. A blind musician, imprisoned for satirizing the nobility, tuned the observatory's water clock by ear after guards smashed its bell. This interdependence reveals the fortress's hidden truth. Progress wasn't solitary genius, but a fragile network of skills and sacrifices. The astronomer's legacy lives in unexpected places. Modern satellite trajectories still use corrections first scribbled in the fortress's margins. A lunar crater bears Laszlo's name, though he never knew it. And every time we check a weather forecast or glance at a calendar, we're touching the echoes of their work, a reminder that the line between ancient stargazing and modern science isn't as straight as we might think. Their true achievement wasn't just mapping the heavens, but proving that even in an age of swords and superstition, human curiosity could reach beyond the limits of its time. Morning light would creep through the library's high windows just as the night watch lowered the drawbridge with a groan that echoed through the courtyard. In those first quiet hours, the fortress buzzed with a rhythm so precise it might have been choreographed, scholars rubbing sleep from their eyes as they unrolled star charts, bakers pulling loaves from the ovens whose warmth reached even the prison's outer cells, and scribes testing freshly cut quills against their thumbs. The air smelled of ink, yeast, and the faint metallic tang of the armory where soldiers polished swords that had never seen battle. What made this daily dance remarkable wasn't just its complexity, but how utterly separate its participants were. A guard patrolling the dungeon's dripping corridors might pass within feet of a librarian shelving volumes on celestial navigation, yet their worlds never truly intersected. The astronomer calculating the summer solstice on his slate board didn't hear the prisoner below counting seconds between the tolling of bells. Even the servants threading through the fortress's arteries carrying firewood to the scriptorium or emptying chamber pots from the nobles' quarters moved like ghosts, their labor essential yet invisible. Mealtimes laid these divides bare. In the great hall, scholars dined on venison and spiced wine, debating Aristotle's ethics between bites, while the prison's inmates received bowls of thin barley gruel slid through slots in their doors. Up in the observatory, the astronomers ate frugally, nuts, dried fruit, and the occasional hard cheese, anything that wouldn't distract from their star charts. The fortress's kitchens, with their roaring fires and sweating scullions, somehow catered to all these appetites without ever acknowledging the gulf between them. Yet there were moments when the barriers cracked. A young scribe might pause to watch the changing of the guard, mesmerized by their synchronized drill. A prisoner sweeping the courtyard under supervision could glimpse an astronomer adjusting his quadrant and wonder, just for a heartbeat, about the mysteries beyond those walls. Even the ruler himself, descending the library's spiral staircase, might catch the distant echo of a hymn from the prison chapel and hesitate, his hand hovering over the railing. The true genius of this place wasn't just in its grand design, but in how it sustained a fragile equilibrium. The scholars needed the guards to protect their precious manuscripts. The guards relied on the cooks to feed them, and the cooks depended on the prisoners to grind grain for flour. Every life within these walls was bound to another in ways they rarely considered, a web of silent dependencies that turned rivals into reluctant partners. By nightfall, the fortress transformed again. Watchmen lit torches along the battlements, their flames painting the stones the color of old blood. In the library, scribes worked by candlelight, their shadows looming like giants on the vaulted ceilings. Somewhere above them, an astronomer tracked Jupiter's moons through a fogged lens, while below, a prisoner traced constellations on his damp cell wall with a fingernail. The fortress never truly slept. It simply shifted its breath, exhaling the day's tensions and inhaling the night's quiet reckonings. And so it went, day after day, year after year, a symphony of contradictions playing out in stone. The same walls that divided these lives also connected them, proving that even in an age of rigid hierarchies, humanity's threads could weave patterns more intricate than any architect ever dreamed. The true power of the fortress wasn't measured in the thickness of its walls or the height of its towers. It was in the unspoken message carved into every stone. Submission and enlightenment were two sides of the same coin. Rulers didn't just occupy this space, they performed in it, staging a spectacle of control that played out in the shuffle of scholars' slippers, the clink of prisoner chains, and the hushed reverence of stargazers. When a visiting ambassador walked these halls, he wasn't just seeing a building, he was witnessing a carefully crafted theater. The library's shelves groaned with translations of Greek philosophy, yes, but also with meticulously copied genealogies proving the ruler's divine right. The prison's groans were audible enough to remind guests of the cost of defiance, yet distant enough to avoid spoiling the wine served in the observatory during meteor showers. This wasn't accidental. The architects designed sightlines so that a scholar at his desk could glimpse a prisoner being led to his cell through a narrow courtyard window, a subtle prompt about the fragility of privilege. Even the celestial observations served political ends. When the court astrologer announced that Jupiter's alignment favored the ruler's upcoming campaign, it wasn't just science, it was celestial endorsement, a way to turn stardust into loyalty. The same moon charts used to plan harvests were also deployed to schedule coronations, ensuring the heavens themselves seemed to anoint the regime. But the most ingenious manipulation was spatial. The fortress's layout forced everyone, scholar, prisoner, soldier, to move through its power structure daily. A philosopher seeking a rare text had to pass the chapel where the ruler's ancestors were entombed. A guard escorting a detainee to the dungeon crossed beneath the observatory's towering instruments, a reminder that authority stretched from the depths of the earth to the stars. Even the library's catalog system reinforced hierarchy: religious texts nearest the warmth of the hearth, controversial works tucked in chilly corners, accessible only to those with the ruler's favor. The brilliance of this design lay in its deniability. Oppression wore velvet gloves here. A dissenting thinker might find himself invited to debate in the library, only to realize too late that his arguments were being archived as evidence. A nobleman imprisoned for treason could be given parchment and ink, not to comfort him, but to extract confessions written in his own elegant hand. The observatory's astronomers, for all their intellectual freedom, knew their funding depended on aligning their predictions with the ruler's ambitions. Control wasn't just enforced, it was curated, woven into the very rituals of scholarship and stargazing until it felt inevitable. What's chilling is how thoroughly this illusion worked. Generations of scholars internalized the fortress's logic, believing their pursuit of knowledge was independent when it was merely sanctioned. Prisoners scratched pleas for mercy on cell walls instead of organizing rebellions, their defiance turned inward. Even the stars, those ancient symbols of freedom, became tools of compliance when their movements were interpreted by court-approved astronomers. The fortress didn't just dominate bodies and minds, it colonized imagination itself, convincing those within its walls that its boundaries were the edges of the world. Yet cracks appeared. Marginal notes in manuscripts reveal scribes questioning official histories. Prison graffiti includes star charts as accurate as those made in the tower above. And one rebellious astronomer's diary, hidden in a hollowed-out beam, confesses he faked eclipse predictions to manipulate a war. These flickers of resistance prove the fortress's greatest weakness. No system of control, no matter how meticulously designed, can fully extinguish the human instinct to ask, why? The stones may have whispered obedience, but somewhere in the shadows, a quill was always poised to write a different story. History remembers the fortress as a beacon of knowledge, but its walls bear the scars of those who saw its treasures as spoils to be seized. In the winter of 1423, an army of mercenaries and rival scholars laid siege, their torches casting long shadows across the snow. They came not just for gold or land, but for the library's forbidden manuscripts, the very maps and star charts that had guided kings and saved harvests. The attackers understood the true prize: control the fortress, and you controlled the future. What followed was a masterclass in adaptation. While archers rained fire from the battlements, scribes worked feverishly in the flickering lamplight, rolling precious texts into lead tubes and sealing them in hollowed-out pillars. The observatory's astronomers dismantled their brass instruments, hiding lenses in flour barrels and compasses among the prison's laundry. Even the dungeon played its part. Its labyrinthine corridors, usually a place of confinement, became escape routes for fleeing townsfolk, guided by prisoners who knew every hidden turn. The same walls designed to keep people in now kept them alive. The siege revealed an unexpected truth. The fortress's greatest strength wasn't its stones, but its people's ingenuity. A cook used the kitchen's massive cauldrons to brew not soup, but boiling oil for the defenders. A poet imprisoned for satire translated enemy shouts from the walls, his linguistic skills turning into military intelligence. And in the library's deepest vault, a half-blind monk continued copying texts by touch, determined that even if the flames took the building, the words would survive. When the attackers finally breached the gates, they found not chaos but eerie order. The hall stood empty of treasures. The scholars vanished into secret passages known only to the architects. The invaders ransacked the observatory only to discover its instruments were useless without the coded manuals burned in the scriptorium's hearth. Even the prison cells, now sheltering women and children, had been stripped of anything valuable. Their iron rings melted down for arrowheads days earlier. The siege lasted 47 days before reinforcements arrived, but the real victory had been won in those first hours of preparation. The fortress fell, yet its heart endured. Manuscripts surfaced years later in distant monasteries, their margins bearing notes proving their origins. Prisoners who'd fled returned to rebuild, their knowledge of the tunnels making them invaluable. And the astronomers, they'd taken their most precious charts to a fishing village downriver, continuing their work by candlelight in a borrowed barn. These moments of crisis stripped away the fortress's contradictions, laying bare its essence. It wasn't just a library or a prison or an observatory, it was an idea. And ideas, as the attackers learned too late, can't be seized with swords. They slip through fingers like starlight, waiting for the moment to ignite again. Time has a way of erasing even the grandest ambitions, and the fortress was no exception. As empires crumbled and borders shifted, the great stronghold slowly faded from memory. The astronomers packed their instruments and vanished, the library's surviving manuscripts smuggled away by fleeing scholars or sold off as scraps of parchment to line nobles' coats. The prison cells stood empty, their iron hinges rusting shut, while ivy crept through arrow slits and cracked the mortar between stones. For centuries, the fortress became little more than a shadow on the hill, a place where shepherds took shelter from storms and children dared each other to touch its weathered gates, whispering that the ghosts of stargazers and prisoners still walked its corridors at midnight. Yet the stones refused to surrender their secrets completely. Farmers plowing nearby fields would unearth strange artifacts, a brass compass needle, a fragment of vellum with half-faded constellations, even the occasional iron shackle twisted into the roots of ancient oaks. Locals called them fortress gifts, tossing some back into the earth for luck and pocketing others as curiosities. The building itself became a patchwork of myths. Some claimed its towers held the lost writings of a heretic who'd predicted the moon's craters centuries before telescopes. Others swore the dungeon's deepest cell housed a skeleton with a silver ring, its gemstone etched with a map to hidden treasure. The turning point came in the damp spring of 1849, when a storm toppled part of the northeast wall, exposing a chamber no one had seen for generations. Inside, archaeologists found not gold or weapons, but something far more precious, a cache of manuscripts sealed in lead tubes, their ink still legible after centuries in the dark. One scroll detailed lunar eclipses with eerie precision. Another was a prisoner's diary, its margins filled with sketches of birds in flight. Word spread, and soon historians arrived with brushes and measuring tapes, their excitement growing with each discovery. A child's fingerprint in dried clay near the scriptorium, charcoal constellations scratched beneath peeling plaster. Even the prison graffiti, once dismissed as vandalism, revealed coded messages between inmates, a testament to resilience in the face of despair. What emerged from the rubble was a portrait of contradictions. The same walls that had confined dissenters also preserved their voices. The library's scorched beams held fragments of texts too dangerous to destroy, their ideas smoldering quietly until the world was ready to hear them. And high in the observatory, where owls nested in the ruins of the great armillary sphere, someone had carved a single word into the stone sill: look. Today, the fortress stands restored not as a monument to any one era, but as a living puzzle. Visitors can trace their fingers over prison graffiti or peer through reconstructed telescopes at the same stars once studied here. The real magic, though, lies in the questions it forces us to ask. How many other forgotten places hold fragments of history in their cracks? What stories might we uncover if we listen not just to the grand narratives of kings and conquests, but to the whispers of those who lived in the margins? The fortress's greatest lesson isn't about the past. It's about the fragility and stubbornness of memory itself, and how even the quietest voices can echo across centuries if someone takes the time to hear them. The fortress still speaks to us, not through crumbling stone or faded ink, but in the way it defies our modern obsession with singular purpose. Today, we build universities separate from prisons, observatories far from city centers, as if knowledge and justice and wonder belong in neatly divided boxes. But this medieval marvel whispers a radical truth. The most enduring spaces and people are those that refuse to be just one thing. Walk through any major museum now, and you'll see its influence. Galleries designed not just to display artifacts, but to spark debate. Their cafes perched beside exhibits so visitors can argue over coffee about the ethics of ancient empires. Like the fortress's library, these institutions have learned that preservation means nothing without conversation. Even our approach to justice bears its fingerprints. Modern prison reformers point to the fortress's darkest corners as both warning and inspiration. Its dungeons teach us how easily punishment becomes cruelty when divorced from humanity, yet its scriptorium, where some prisoners copied texts as scribes, hints at redemption's possibility. A Norwegian maximum security facility now incorporates sunlight and books into its design, not as luxuries, but as acknowledgements that even the condemned remain thinkers, dreamers, people who might yet contribute. The fortress's genius and its tragedy was recognizing that bars and books could coexist in the same building, even if its rulers failed to extend that duality to the people inside. Then there's the stargazers' legacy. Every time NASA names a Mars rover after a fortress astronomer or a physicist cites a 14th century lunar chart, we're stitching threads across centuries. The observatory's brass instruments may seem primitive next to the James Webb Space Telescope, but their purpose was identical: to measure the immeasurable, to reach beyond what the era deemed possible. Modern astronomers still face ethical dilemmas the fortress scholars would recognize, debating whether to broadcast Earth's location to the cosmos, or grappling with the military funding behind their satellites. The questions have grown more complex, but the tension between discovery and responsibility remains unchanged. What's most startling is how the fortress mirrors our own contradictions. We champion open access to information while algorithms silo us into echo chambers. We build telescopes that peer back to the universe's birth yet struggle to see the humanity in our neighbors. Perhaps that's why its stones still fascinate us. They're a mirror, reflecting not just medieval ingenuity, but our own unresolved dualities. The real lesson isn't about architecture or history. It's about refusing to let our institutions or ourselves be flattened into simple categories. After all, a building that housed both prisoners and astronomers understood something we're still learning. Light and shadow aren't opposites. They're the very things that give each other meaning. The moment the fortress's gates fell, its greatest treasures were already slipping away, not in chests of gold, but in the satchels of fleeing scholars. One monk sewed pages of Aristotle's lost dialogues into his robe's lining. A wounded scribe traded his silver ring to a fisherman for passage down river, clutching a watertight case holding Euclid's geometric proofs. These weren't just books they saved, they were sparks carried into the storm of history with the desperate hope they'd catch fire somewhere new. Some manuscripts found unlikely sanctuaries. A Persian merchant smuggled a treatise on optics hidden in a bolt of silk, its diagrams later inspiring lens grinders in Venice. A troupe of actors used the margins of a stolen medical text to scribble stage directions, unaware they'd preserved the only copy of a Syrian physician's life work. The fortress's library, meant to centralize knowledge, became instead a great disperser, its volumes scattering like dandelion seeds on the wind, taking root in monasteries, royal courts, even a Moorish physician's traveling clinic. The Renaissance owes this chaos an unexpected debt. When a Florentine scholar stumbled upon a crumbling codex in a Budapest monastery, he recognized the fortress's distinctive purple ink, and with it, a lost argument about democracy that would shape political thought for centuries. Another manuscript, rediscovered lining a wine barrel in Burgundy, contained star charts so accurate they corrected errors in Copernicus's early models. The very act of the library's destruction had accomplished what its builders never imagined, making knowledge nomadic, impossible to fully erase. Yet for every text that resurfaced, others vanished into legend. Catalogues mention a book of earthly machines with diagrams of water wheels that could power entire cities, and a map of the antipodes said to depict lands unknown to medieval Europe. Were these destroyed, or do they still lie forgotten in some private collection, their significance unrecognized? The mystery haunts historians, a reminder that every age loses as much as it preserves. Today, scholars are stitching the library back together, not with parchment and glue, but with pixels and code. Digitization projects cross-reference fragments from a dozen countries, matching water stains and wormhole patterns to reconstruct lost volumes. A team in Vienna recently used spectral imaging to recover a palimpsest, a prayer book, overwriting an astronomer's notes, revealing celestial calculations unseen for 700 years. It's a fitting second life for a collection that always defied boundaries, a library without walls where anyone with an internet connection can trace the same constellations a prisoner once scratched onto his cell wall, or read the marginalia of scholars long turned to dust. The irony would not be lost on the fortress's builders. They dreamed of knowledge guarded behind impenetrable walls, only for their greatest legacy to be its refusal to stay contained. Every time a student quotes a rediscovered proverb or a scientist cites an ancient formula, the library wins its quiet victory, proving that ideas, once set loose in the world, are far harder to imprison than people. The fortress's dungeons were more than just stone and iron. They were a mirror held up to society's contradictions. While scholars debated ethics in sunlit halls above, prisoners below scratched their protests into walls, their voices echoing through time. Today, those markings serve as a visceral reminder of how easily systems meant to protect can become instruments of control. Modern prison reformers point to these very cells as evidence of what happens when punishment eclipses humanity. The same rulers who funded groundbreaking astronomy also authorized interrogation techniques that left prisoners broken in body and spirit. This duality forces us to ask, how do we balance accountability with compassion, security with dignity, One particularly chilling discovery was a ledger from the warden's office, its pages detailing rations reduced for uncooperative inmates while the library's scribes feasted on venison. This wasn't just cruelty, it was a calculated demonstration of power, a way to remind everyone that knowledge and mercy were privileges, not rights. Contemporary activists draw direct parallels to modern solitary confinement practices, where isolation becomes psychological warfare. Yet the fortress also offers unexpected glimmers of hope. Archaeologists found evidence that some jailers smuggled books to educated prisoners, creating an illicit exchange of ideas beneath the official system's radar. Even in darkness, the human thirst for connection and meaning refused to be extinguished. The push to repurpose historical prisons like the fortress reflects a growing recognition that these spaces must bear witness. In Sweden, a medieval jail now hosts school groups who handle replica shackles while discussing restorative justice. A former penitentiary in Philadelphia invites visitors to sit in cells where they hear recordings of incarcerated poets. These projects don't just memorialize suffering, they challenge us to confront uncomfortable truths about who gets labeled criminal and why. The fortress's greatest lesson might be this: when we hide away the worst of our justice systems, we risk repeating their failures. Legal scholars note how the line between the fortress's library and prison was literally a staircase. A philosopher could descend from debating free will to witnessing its absolute denial in minutes. That physical proximity mirrors modern dilemmas like courts that champion rehabilitation while underfunding prison education programs, or lawmakers who cite Enlightenment values yet resist sentencing reform. The tension isn't medieval, it's universal. Perhaps that's why the fortress endures as more than a ruin. It's a provocation, demanding we reconcile the noble ideals we enshrine in books with the gritty realities we lock behind bars. The stones don't judge, they simply ask, centuries later, which side of history will we choose to build on? Climbing the fortress's observatory tower today, it's hard not to feel the weight of centuries pressing down on those worn stone steps. The brass instruments that once charted comets now seem almost childlike in their simplicity, a far cry from the billion-pixel cameras of the James Webb Space Telescope. Yet every modern observatory owes a debt to these medieval pioneers who recorded the heavens with nothing but patience and precision. Their hand-drawn star charts, once dismissed as primitive, have become unexpected treasure troves for climate scientists. By comparing comet sightings and eclipse records with modern data, researchers can trace shifts in Earth's atmosphere over 800 years, revealing patterns invisible to short-term observations. That monk squinting at Mars through a fogged lens was laying groundwork for planetary science he'd never comprehend. What's truly remarkable is how these astronomers bridged the gap between observation and imagination. Without calculus or spectrometers, they devised theories about lunar craters being impact sites rather than imperfections, or speculated about distant worlds orbiting other suns, ideas ridiculed in their time but proven centuries later. Their notebooks reveal a rhythm familiar to any modern astrophysicist, pages of painstaking measurements followed by wild, in-kai leaps of hypothesis, the words growing larger and more frantic as excitement overtook caution. This dance between data and daring still defines space exploration today. When the Event Horizon Telescope captured the first image of a black hole's shadow in 2019, it confirmed equations scribbled on a chalkboard decades earlier, a proof that medieval and modern scientists share the same restless impulse to test ideas against the unforgiving mirror of reality. The fortress's greatest legacy might be its demonstration that progress isn't linear. Some of its astronomers' tools were actually regressions from earlier Islamic and Greek designs, their knowledge fragmented by wars and schisms. Yet they persevered, adapting quadrants forged for navigation to track Jupiter's moons, or repurposing cathedral bells as timers for eclipse predictions. This scrappy ingenuity resonates in today's space programs, where Mars rovers are upgraded with software from previous missions, and astronauts jury-rig repairs with duct tape and grit. The spirit of making do with what's at hand, whether 14th century brass or 21st century carbon fiber, binds these explorers across time. Perhaps most poignant is how the universe itself became their shared laboratory. The same supernova that lit up the sky in 1054, dazzling Song Dynasty astronomers, was later studied through the fortress's telescopes and now fuels Harvard astrophysics lectures. That exploding star's light, traveling 16,000 years to reach Earth, connected human curiosity across millennia. Modern satellites may orbit where medieval stargazers couldn't dream of reaching, but they're answering questions first whispered in that tower: are we alone? How did this all begin? What's beyond the next horizon? The tools have changed, but the wonder remains, a torch passed from hand to hand, glowing brighter with each generation. Archaeologists working in the fortress's lower levels made a discovery in 2018 that sent shockwaves through the historical community: a hidden alcove behind a collapsed wall, its contents untouched for centuries. Inside lay a trove of astronomical instruments so finely crafted they defied medieval stereotypes. A brass astrolabe engraved with constellations unrecognizable to modern star charts, a set of crystal lenses ground to near-perfect curvature, and a celestial globe depicting Jupiter's moons decades before Galileo's telescope confirmed them. The real revelation came when conservators peeled apart the layers of a waterlogged notebook found nestled beside them. Its pages, though brittle, preserved the meticulous observations of an astronomer named Sister Marguerite, a name absent from official records, who'd not only predicted solar flares but linked them to disruptions in migratory bird patterns, a connection modern science only verified in the 1960s. Then came the prison diary, tucked inside a hollowed-out brick in the dungeon's infirmary. This fragile parchment bundle bore the cramped handwriting of a physician named Elias, jailed for treating plague victims against the Crown's orders. His entries alternated between medical notes smuggled to his students and heartbreaking sketches of the stars as seen through his barred window. One passage describes how he timed his fellow prisoners' fevers by tracking shadows moving across the cell floor, turning his chains into an improvised sundial. Another recounts teaching an illiterate cellmate to read using constellations scratched into the wall, proving even in darkness, the human hunger for knowledge refused to be extinguished. But perhaps the most haunting find emerged from the library's north wall, where infrared scans in 2021 detected pigments beneath layers of whitewash. Restorers painstakingly uncovered a fresco showing scholars at work, not as the solitary monks of popular imagination, but as a vibrant, multicultural collective. A turbaned mathematician points to a star chart while a woman in scribe's robes adjusts a mechanical clock, her gown's embroidery matching patterns found on excavated Silk Road textiles. Most striking is the figure in the corner, a man in shackles, his quill poised over parchment, proof that the line between prisoner and scholar was sometimes thinner than the fortress's own walls suggested. These discoveries upended long-held assumptions. The crystal lenses proved medieval opticians achieved precision we'd credited to later eras. Sister Marguerite's notebook rewrote the timeline of women in science. Elias's diary revealed the dungeon wasn't just a place of despair, but of clandestine classrooms where knowledge became resistance. Each layer peeled back exposes how much we've underestimated the people who walked these halls, their ingenuity, their resilience, their refusal to let walls define the limits of their minds. The real lesson lies in what's still missing: The astrolabe's unknown constellations suggest lost star maps. Gaps in Elias's diary hint at pages smuggled out, perhaps still waiting in some attic trunk. And that library fresco, infrared, shows outlines of other figures scrubbed away, erased, but not fully gone. History isn't a sealed book, but a palimpsest, where every generation finds new words bleeding through the old. As long as places like this fortress stand, their stones will keep whispering secrets to those patient enough to listen. Stepping through the fortress gates today feels like crossing a threshold between centuries. The same stones that once echoed with the clank of prisoner chains now hum with the quiet whir of holographic guides, their translucent figures materializing to point out where an astronomer once charted comets or where a desperate inmate scratched their final words. This isn't just preservation, it's resurrection. The library, once a sanctuary for heretical texts, has been recreated down to the scent of beeswax candles, its replica shelves holding facsimiles so precise you can see the frayed edges where generations of scholars thumbed the same page. Visitors linger over these copies, tracing in Chi constellations with fingertips, unaware they're mirroring gestures made 600 years ago. But the real magic lies in the prison's transformation. Where darkness once stifled hope, discreet speakers now whisper inmate stories in the first person. A baker imprisoned for debt recounting how he marked days by the slant of sunlight on his cell wall, or a noblewoman's defiant letters to her children, read aloud by an actress with a tremor in her voice. These aren't dry historical accounts, they're raw, intimate monologues that make the past feel achingly close. The genius is in the details, the way a holographic guard's torch flickers authentically against the damp stone, or how the gentle confinement cell's temperature drops slightly at dusk, just as historical records describe. Up in the observatory, the line between past and present blurs entirely. By day, visitors peer through meticulously recreated brass telescopes, their lenses ground using medieval techniques. But come nightfall, the tower becomes a time machine. Modern astronomers lead stargazing sessions using the same constellations the fortress's scholars mapped, their laser pointers tracing paths over the sky while holographic projections overlay ancient star charts onto the dome above. It's here that the fortress's dual soul shines brightest, a place where cutting-edge technology serves to illuminate how much and how little our understanding of the cosmos has changed. Preservation here is a high-wire act. Conservators battle not just time, but the weight of countless footsteps wearing grooves into original staircases. They've devised ingenious solutions, nearly invisible nanofiber coatings to protect graffiti from oily fingertips, AI that analyzes visitor traffic to rotate which manuscript facsimiles are displayed, even a breathing climate system that subtly adjusts humidity as crowds ebb and flow. The goal isn't to freeze the fortress in amber, but to let it live, to keep it a place where a child can gasp at touching the same banister a stargazer once gripped, where a historian might suddenly recognize a forgotten cipher in the prison graffiti, where the past isn't just studied but felt. What lingers after a visit isn't the tech or the artifacts, but the echoes. The way twilight paints the courtyard the same gold it did when scholars hurried to Vespers, or how the observatory's shadow still falls precisely where the sundial predicted in 1421. This fortress endures not as a relic, but as a conversation, a dialogue across centuries about what we choose to remember and why. The holograms may fade when the tour ends, but the questions they spark burn long after. Whose stories haven't we heard yet? What forgotten brilliance still hides in these stones? And what will future generations make of the marks we leave behind? The fortress's silhouette against the horizon has long been more than just stone and shadow. It's become a canvas for the human imagination. Poets across centuries have pressed its walls into service as metaphor, comparing its labyrinthine corridors to the twists of thought, its sunlit libraries to moments of clarity, its dungeons to the prisons we build in our own mind. One 17th century sonnet describes the observatory's tower as a finger pointing past the edge of knowing, while a modernist verse from the 1920s imagines the prison cells as the rooms we lock inside ourselves. These aren't just pretty turns of phrase, they're evidence of how deeply the fortress embeds itself in our collective psyche, a shape-shifting symbol for whatever era encounters it. Novelists, too, have been drawn to its contradictions like moths to a guttering candle. A best-selling Gothic romance from 1839 sets its climax in the library's restricted section, where the heroine discovers forbidden love letters tucked between Aristotle's pages. A Cold War-era spy thriller uses the fortress's hidden passages as the backdrop for a tense exchange of state secrets, the characters literally walking the line between enlightenment and espionage. What fascinates these writers isn't just the dramatic potential of the setting, but the way its architecture mirrors their themes. The thriller's protagonist, like the fortress itself, is both hunter and hunted, keeper of knowledge and prisoner of circumstance. Painters, meanwhile, can't resist the play of light on those weathered stones. A famous Romantic-era oil painting shows the observatory's tower spearing through storm clouds, its tip bathed in sunlight while the lower walls drown in shadow, a visual metaphor for human aspiration. Contemporary street artists have taken up the theme, one mural in Berlin reimagining the fortress as a stack of books with barred windows, its foundations made of chained hands. Even the prison's graffiti has inspired installations worldwide. A Tokyo museum recently recreated an entire cell wall's etchings in neon, turning centuries-old desperation into pulsating art. Filmmakers exploit the fortress's innate theatricality. Its corridors, with their sudden turns and echoing footsteps, are a gift to suspense directors. One celebrated horror movie used the dungeon's whispering gallery, where sound carries eerily between cells, to make audience members question whether they were hearing ghosts or guilt. Historical dramas linger on the library's candlelit aisles, the camera drinking in the tension between quiet scholarship and the explosive ideas concealed in those volumes. And in a surrealist masterpiece from the 1970s, the entire fortress becomes a dreamscape, its staircases leading nowhere, its doors opening onto different centuries, a visual poem about memory's unreliability. What unites these interpretations is their refusal to settle on a single meaning. The fortress is never just a backdrop, it's a collaborator shaping stories with its very stones. A children's book illustrator might depict its towers as whimsical and inviting, while a graphic novelist renders them in jagged, oppressive lines. A composer writes a symphony where the brass section echoes the dungeon's clanging gates, while the strings mimic scribes' quills scratching across parchment. Each creator finds in the fortress what they need: a mirror for hope or dread, order or chaos, proof that great architecture doesn't just house stories, it births them. Perhaps most telling is how the fortress has leaked into everyday language. To read like a scribe means to devour knowledge voraciously. Observatory silence describes a hush heavy with unasked questions. Even its failures inspire idioms. When a project collapses under its own complexity, we say it pulled a fortress wall. These phrases endure because they carry the weight of lived experience, the sense that this building isn't just a place we visit, but a lens through which we've learned to see the world. The stones may crumble, the manuscripts fade, but the stories we've grafted onto them, those are indestructible. High above the valley floor, where winter winds howl like restless spirits, the fortress clings to the cliffs with the tenacity of a living thing. Its endurance isn't accidental, it's the result of engineering so advanced. It humiliates modern assumptions about medieval technology. Take the courtyard's paving stones, each slightly convex to funnel rainwater into hidden channels that snake beneath the prison floors. This wasn't just drainage, it was climate control. The same water that pooled in cisterns for the library's humidors also circulated through clay pipes beneath the dungeon, creating a crude but effective air exchange system that prevented total stagnation. Even in confinement, the architects refused to let breath turn toxic. Then there's the mortar, a recipe so unconventional it baffled restorers for decades. Microscopic analysis revealed crushed oyster shells, horsehair, and even traces of wine sediment mixed into the lime. The shells prevented cracking in freezing temperatures by creating microscopic flex points, while the organic fibers acted like prehistoric rebar, distributing stress across the walls. Most startling, the wine's acidity accelerated the curing process, allowing builders to work through short construction seasons. This wasn't guesswork, it was chemistry passed down through generations of masons who understood their materials like cooks know their stews. The library's placement defied all convention. While most medieval collections were buried in damp basements to protect them from fire, this one occupied the sunniest southern wing. The architects banked on a radical idea: light was the lesser evil. They sandwiched the walls with layers of porous volcanic stone that wickeded moisture outward, while narrow ventilation shafts created constant airflow. Manuscripts were stored in alcoves lined with cedar, a wood whose aromatic oils repelled insects without staining vellum. The result: texts survived centuries in better condition than those kept in later, state-of-the-art archives. But the observatory's precision still stuns. Its central spire isn't merely aligned to true north, it compensates for magnetic drift over time. Builders embedded lodestones at specific points in the foundation, creating a self-correcting system that subtly shifts the tower's orientation as the planet's magnetic field evolves. The slit windows framing solstice sunrises, they're calibrated to within a finger's width, their edges beveled to sharpen the sunlight into knife-thin beams that hit marked stones on the floor. Achieving this without telescopes or precise clocks required not just skill, but a willingness to fail. Archaeologists found stacks of discarded plumb bobs in the moat, evidence of countless experiments to perfect the angles. What's most remarkable isn't any single innovation, but how they intertwine. The same courtyard draining system fed the clepsydra in the prison, its water clock keeping time for both interrogations and eclipse predictions. The library's cedar shelves were carved from trees grown in the garrison's orchard, their roots stabilized by crushed mortar recycled from earlier renovations. Every solution served multiple masters, creating a closed loop of efficiency that modern engineers now study as a model of sustainable design. This interconnected brilliance exposes a myth about the so-called Dark Ages. These builders weren't superstitious simpletons, they were pragmatists who observed, experimented, and iterated. When the north wall developed cracks after 50 years, they didn't just patch it. They analyzed the fracture patterns and adjusted the mortar mix, leaving behind a recipe that's still used in heritage conservation today. Their legacy isn't just a fortress that defies time, but a challenge to our arrogance. Before steel girders and computer models, there were minds that solved problems with nothing but patience and perception, and left us blueprints in stone. Even after centuries of study, the fortress guards its secrets with the same stubbornness its walls once defied invaders. Take the case of the so-called Phantom Scholar, a prisoner recorded in the warden's logs as receiving quills and ink, yet whose name appears in no surviving trial records. Some historians insist he was a disgraced nobleman, allowed to continue his work in confinement as part of a secret pardon. Others point to charcoal sketches of a hooded figure in the dungeon's graffiti, arguing he was an underground scribe documenting abuses. The truth may lie in between. Recent infrared scans revealed layers of writing beneath the cell's plaster, mathematical equations too advanced for casual doodling, hinting at a mind too valuable to silence completely. Then there's the library's greatest loss, the infamous Book of Earthly Machines. Contemporary catalogues describe its pages brimming with diagrams for water wheels that could power entire cities and bridges that folded like parchment. But did it burn when the siege torches fell, or was it smuggled to safety? A fragmentary letter discovered in a Venetian archive claims a merchant saw it loaded onto a ship bound for Alexandria, its pages wrapped in oilskin. Yet engineers who have studied the fortress's own water systems argue its mechanisms match the book's descriptions too closely to be coincidence. Was it copied before disappearing? Or worse, did later generations dismiss its innovations as fantasy because the originals vanished? The observatory's legacy is equally contested. While its brass instruments undeniably advanced astronomy, court records reveal rulers consulting star charts for everything from crop forecasts to sentencing dates. Was this pragmatic science or sanctioned mysticism? The divide crystallizes in the figure of astronomer Royal Matthias, whose meticulous eclipse predictions saved coastal villages, yet whose private journal brims with astrological symbols. His successor burned half those pages, calling them dangerous folly, but modern psychologists recognize them as early attempts to link cosmic patterns to human behavior. When does observation cross into superstition? The fortress's scholars likely wouldn't have drawn the line where we do today. Even the building's original intent sparks fierce argument. The traditional view paints it as a deliberate fusion of knowledge and control, but architectural forensics suggest otherwise. Core samples reveal the dungeon was added a decade after the library's completion, its foundations cutting through original plumbing lines. And that celestial alignment everyone praises. It's off by 3 degrees, a mistake unthinkable for builders who nailed solstice markers to the width of a hair. The truth may be messier, a vanity project repurposed by pragmatists, its evolution as accidental as it was brilliant. What keeps historians returning isn't just the thrill of the unsolved. It's the fortress's uncanny habit of answering one question only to raise 3 more. Each cracked codex exposes gaps in another. Every scanned wall reveals writing beneath the writing. The debates in its halls never truly ended. They just passed the torch to us. Perhaps that's the real lesson lurking in these stones. Certainty is the rarest treasure of all, and the pursuit often matters more than the prize. What makes the fortress so haunting isn't just its history. It's the way its very stones seem to hold up a mirror to the human condition. Think about the way light moves through its spaces. The library's vaulted ceilings drenched in sunlight, the observatory's towers bathed in starlight, the dungeon's corridors swallowed by perpetual shadow. This isn't just architecture, it's a physical manifestation of how we compartmentalize our own lives. We all have our illuminated spaces, the parts of ourselves we proudly display, and our locked chambers, the corners we keep hidden even from those closest to us. The fortress doesn't just symbolize this duality, it forces us to confront it. Writers have long seized on this tension. In a celebrated modern novel, the protagonist, a disillusioned scholar, finds herself literally retracing the steps between the fortress's library and prison, each room representing a different facet of her fractured identity. The book's genius lies in how it mirrors our own societal structures. The way education systems promise liberation while quietly enforcing conformity, or how institutions hoard knowledge like treasure, doling it out only to those who play by the rules. The fortress becomes a stand-in for any system that both elevates and entraps. Its walls a reminder that enlightenment and control often share the same foundation. Psychologists take this further, mapping the building's layout onto theories of the mind. The library, with its orderly shelves and careful cataloging, mirrors our conscious thoughts, curated, accessible, meant for display. But descend to the dungeon, and you're in the realm of the subconscious, repressed memories, unspoken fears, the parts of ourselves we chain away. Even the observatory fits the model, representing those rare moments of clarity when we rise above our daily grind to glimpse something transcendent. It's no accident that patients in therapy often describe breakthroughs as seeing the stars for the first time, the same stars those medieval astronomers charted from their lonely perch. Artists and philosophers take the metaphor deeper still. One contemporary installation recreates the fortress's floor plan in glass, forcing visitors to walk a transparent tightrope between knowledge and confinement zones. Another project shifting labels onto the walls: school, prison, church, highlighting how easily institutions swap roles depending on who holds the keys. These interpretations expose the fortress's most unsettling truth. There's no single way to read it. A historian might see progress forged in fire, a poet the cost of that progress measured in silenced voices. Its meaning shifts like light through stained glass, colored by whoever stands to receive it. Perhaps that's why this medieval stronghold feels so eerily modern. In an age of algorithms that feed us knowledge while mining our data, of universities that champion free thought yet drown in bureaucracy, the fortress's contradictions are ours. We still build towers to reach the stars figuratively now, with particle colliders and space telescopes, while constructing new dungeons of disinformation and digital surveillance. The stones whisper a warning. Every age thinks it struck the perfect balance between wisdom and power, only for the next to see the chains hidden beneath the parchment. The true test isn't whether we can design better buildings, but whether we can build societies where the observatory's doors aren't locked against those still waiting in the dark. Preserving a structure as complex and contradictory as the fortress isn't just about patching cracks, it's a high-stakes negotiation between past and present. Every stone tells a story, and every repair risks rewriting it. Take the library's iconic cedar shelves, ravaged by centuries of fluctuating humidity. Traditionalists demanded replacements be hand-carved from the same rare timber, but sourcing it would have meant stripping protected forests, the compromise. A blend of ethically harvested cedar for visible surfaces, paired with hidden steel, supports a marriage of old and new that honors the spirit of the original craftsmen without repeating their ecological toll. Then there's the dungeon's moral dilemma. Should conservators preserve the graffiti-scarred walls exactly as prisoners left them, or mitigate the oppressive atmosphere for modern visitors? One team proposed backlighting the etchings to make them more legible, while others argued this would sanitize the horror of confinement. The solution emerged from an unlikely source: descendants of former inmates who insisted the darkness was part of the truth. Now timed lighting gradually illuminates the carvings during tours, allowing visitors to experience both the grim reality and the resilience etched into those stones. Climate control presents its own labyrinth of challenges. The observatory's precision instruments corrode if humidity dips below 30%, yet the prison's original mortar crumbles above 50%. Engineers devised microclimate-sealed display cases with independent systems, ensuring Galileo's contemporary star charts and a prisoner's last charcoal sketch can coexist under one roof. Even the courtyard's ancient sundial required intervention. Pollution had dulled its shadow-casting gnomon until a nano-thin titanium coating, virtually invisible, restored its accuracy without altering its silhouette. Funding these efforts is a perpetual tightrope walk. When a tech magnate offered to sponsor the library's restoration in exchange for digital naming rights, historians balked, until students proposed projecting donor names onto the floor in disappearing ink during nighttime events. The compromise satisfied both purists and pragmatists, proving innovation could honor tradition. Meanwhile, local schoolchildren crowdfund repairs to the herb garden by selling seeds from its medieval plants, tying preservation directly to community pride. The greatest challenge isn't technical but philosophical. Some argue the fortress should be frozen at its peak 15th century glory, while others push for visible seams between old and new, like the glass walkways that now span collapsed sections, letting visitors literally tread between eras. This tension mirrors the building's own history, a place that was always adapting, always serving multiple masters. The restoration team's motto, "We're not saving a monument, we're sustaining a conversation," captures their mission. Every repaired archway, every carefully replicated manuscript stand, is an invitation to keep asking what we owe the past and how much of ourselves we're willing to invest in its future. Imagine a classroom where students in Tokyo, Toronto, or Cape Town slip on virtual reality headsets and suddenly stand in the fortress's moonlit courtyard, their footsteps echoing off stones laid 6 centuries ago. This isn't science fiction, it's the cutting edge of history education. Through high-resolution 3D scans and painstaking audio recreations, students can now trace the same paths as medieval astronomers, their virtual hands brushing against the brass instruments once used to chart the heavens. Teachers report how one student froze in her headset, mesmerized by the prison graffiti she'd studied in textbooks, now towering before her in chilling detail. "It's like time travel," she whispered, "but the ghosts are real." Beyond the digital realm, the fortress's legacy lives in the tactile world of ink and parchment. Calligraphy workshops across Europe and North America use exact replicas of the library's manuscripts, their margins still bearing the coffee stains and doodles of long-dead scribes. Children hunched over these copies don't just learn letter forms, they uncover the human stories hidden between the lines. A smudged fingerprint near a botched Latin translation becomes a conversation about perfectionism. A hastily sketched dragon in the margin sparks debates about creativity under pressure. These workshops reveal something profound. Handling history's artifacts, even facsimiles, transforms dates and names into something visceral and personal. Up in school rooftops and community centers, amateur astronomers gather to replicate the fortress's most famous experiments. Using homemade quadrants modeled after the originals, they track Jupiter's moons just as medieval scholars did, only now their data gets uploaded to global databases comparing ancient and modern observations. The results astonish professionals. Some of the fortress's errors in eclipse predictions weren't mistakes at all, but evidence of atmospheric conditions that today's satellites confirm. These clubs bridge eras, proving that curiosity needs no expensive tools, just patience and a clear night sky. Perhaps the most transformative programs unfold in civics classrooms, where the fortress's prison records become case studies in justice. Students role-play as the ruler's advisors, debating whether to pardon a scholar jailed for heresy or a thief stealing bread for his family. Original trial documents, translated and annotated, reveal how class and literacy shaped outcomes, a noble's elegant plea versus a peasant's stumbling defense. These discussions inevitably turn contemporary. How do we balance punishment and rehabilitation today? Who gets to define crime? The past becomes a mirror, reflecting uncomfortable truths about modern systems. What makes these initiatives extraordinary isn't just their innovation, but their refusal to simplify history. The VR experience includes the dungeon's choking dampness alongside the library's golden light. Calligraphy students copy both beautiful psalms and censored passages where ink bleeds through scratched-out words. By confronting the fortress's full complexity, its brilliance and brutality, these programs teach young minds to hold multiple truths at once. That's the real lesson echoing through time. Understanding isn't about choosing sides, but learning to stand in the space where light and shadow meet. The fortress stands today not as a relic frozen in time, but as a living question carved in stone. Its walls hold a paradox that still echoes through our modern world: how the same hands that penned groundbreaking theories also turn the keys in iron locks, how the pursuit of enlightenment often walked hand in hand with the machinery of control. This duality pulses through every restored manuscript and reconstructed cell, refusing to let us look away from history's uncomfortable truths. Walk its corridors now, and you'll notice something remarkable. Visitors linger longest in the spaces where contradictions collide, where sunlight from the library's stained glass spills onto the dungeon's reconstructed shackles, or where an astronomer's star chart hangs beside the prisoner's charcoal constellations. These aren't just displays, they're mirrors reflecting our own era's tensions between open access and surveillance, between innovation and exploitation. The fortress challenges us to hold both wonder and unease in the same breath, to recognize that progress rarely wears a spotless white robe. What makes this place endure isn't just its physical grandeur, but the conversations it ignites. Scholars debate whether its library's openness was true intellectual freedom or clever propaganda. Prison reformers analyze its dungeon's graffiti as early acts of resistance. Astronomers still pore over its star charts, marveling at how much these medieval scholars got right with such limited tools. Each perspective adds another thread to the tapestry, proving that great history isn't about finding answers, it's about learning to ask better questions. Perhaps the most poignant lesson lies in the fortress's unfinished stories, that half-translated manuscript hinting at undiscovered lands, those star charts with gaps where comets should be, the prisoner's diary that ends mid-sentence. They remind us that history isn't a closed book, but a volume with torn pages waiting to be rediscovered. The same curiosity that drove those long-dead stargazers to map the unknown now drives archaeologists scanning walls with infrared and linguists decoding marginalia. The conversation across centuries continues, and we're all invited to add our voices. So let this be the fortress's final gift, not closure, but invitation. An urging to look closer at the structures around us, to question what narratives they uphold and what voices they silence. When you next gaze at the night sky, remember those who did the same from these battlements centuries ago, their dreams etched in ink and their regrets scratched into stone. The stars they studied haven't changed, but how we choose to see them and each other still can. Share in the comments what part of this story stays with you and what questions it's inspired you to ask. After all, the best histories aren't just told, they're lived.